So I'm Colleen. I am a personal trainer and I actually focus on prenatal and postpartum fitness. And that all kind of came about as I was going through it myself. I had my first child in 2020 and my second child in 2022. So I have two young children. I live just outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And yeah, I'm a very active person, being a trainer and living with two crazy young children.
8.
So my journey to pregnancy was actually interesting when I finally decided I want to start trying. I am married. I got married in 2016. So we kind of had a couple years to ourselves to do our thing, travel, whatever. So I had been on birth control for years, as many women have. And when I got off of it in April of 2019, my cycle was like all over the place. Like I could not track it. It was like maybe 45 days long, then 57 days long, then 38 days long. So it was like a little bit stressful in that I didn't know why my body wasn't like regulating. So that was kind of interesting. Like the first few months there, I just couldn't get a read on my body, my cycle, anything. So, trying to track for ovulation was extremely difficult. And then somehow, luckily, like the first time finding my ovulation, we were able to get pregnant. But it was just kind of a crazy time. And I also didn't know when to test for the pregnancy because, like, again, my cycle was not a consistent timing. So I'm like, I don't know how many weeks to wait to test, like, whatever. So eventually I did test and it happened to be on my husband's birthday in October. And I was like, surprise, we're pregnant. But one of the first symptoms I had was like brown discharge in my underwear, which I just had never had before. And I was like, oh, okay, this feels a little weird. And then about like a week later, my boobs hurt so bad, like so bad. I just was like, what is happening? I mean, obviously at that point I was like, okay, I know what's happening, but the boobs hurt so bad. I want to say I probably went to my first appointment between 8 and 10 weeks. I don't remember exactly when. But they definitely wanted to bring me in to like do the dating ultrasound, like the vaginal ultrasound to like date, what potentially the due date was. Because again, it wasn't just like, oh, well, my last period was at this time, which kind of normally helps date it. So my due date changed like 3 times over the course of this pregnancy. So originally they were like, all right, due date is June 28th. And then when I got my 20-week anatomy scan, it had changed again. And then he was even born early. So it was all over the place. But it was, I guess, hard to date it. One, not knowing my cycle. And two, they may have just not gotten a good picture of the baby in the first ultrasound. But we both went together to the first appointment. It was great. Everything, looked good, heard the heartbeat and everything. So we did some blood work testing, one to find out the gender, and also I wanted to find out if I carried the cystic fibrosis gene because it does kind of run in my family. And then if I would have carried it, we would have looked into my husband. But of course, we couldn't get this testing done prior to pregnancy because of insurance reasons. So they would only do the testing once we were pregnant. I was like, that's convenient. So luckily, I'm not a carrier, so we weren't worried about that. But we did the blood work testing to find out it was a boy. We did find out early. And I think that was the main testing we did. And honestly, I felt, aside from the boobs hurting in the beginning, I felt relatively fine most of my pregnancy. As I mentioned, I'm a personal trainer. So I was, busy, active, running all over the place, teaching at 3 different gyms in Philadelphia, like just keeping a pretty busy schedule, and working out myself. And I really, like, sometimes I would stop and be like, I'm not having symptoms. Like, am I pregnant? Because I didn't even show for a really long time, till about at least halfway. So it was kind of surreal. I was like, I know this is happening. Basically, I felt pretty fine until some point in the 3rd trimester. Also important to note that right around when my 3rd trimester was starting was when the pandemic hit and shut everything down. So I probably had my last in-person appointment around 27 or 28 weeks, sometime in March. So entering the 3rd trimester, the world shut down. We have telehealth appointments, which is just like this, like a video call or literal phone call, until I was 36 weeks. So that's like almost a 10-week gap. So in the meantime, it was like, oh, like check your weight, check your blood pressure. Like luckily my mom's a nurse, so she would come over and check my blood pressure for me. But yeah, there was no in-person anything until I got to 36 weeks. Um, in the third trimester, I did have pretty bad heartburn in the third trimester that kept me up at night. So like it would be like an hour or two after I would lay down to go to bed, and I just could not sleep. I had to come downstairs on the couch, like prop myself up slightly because it's like the laying down that triggers it. So I had to like prop myself up on the couch, sleep downstairs. So that was very annoying. But that was really, one of the only major symptoms I would say that I had. So I had that like in the third trimester. And then I would say I probably started to feel a little weird towards the end, maybe 33, 34 weeks. I couldn't like pinpoint anything, but just a little more sluggish and tired and a little bit out of it. But it was my first pregnancy. I was like, maybe this is normal. Like, I know it's not supposed to be like a cakewalk. So here it is. Like, here's the pregnancy symptoms I've been like not having. But along with that, I remember specifically, I was virtually training one client, video training, and she was like, your face looks a little swollen. And I was like, oh, okay. I didn't think too much of it until I forget one telehealth appointment. My blood pressure was like a little bit higher than normal. And I was like, okay. So of course I started Googling. And I did have some suspicions that like, okay, this could be pre-eclampsia. It usually shows with high blood pressure, high protein in your urine, which I wasn't getting that checked because I wasn't going into the office and doing a urine sample. So I would say they first said it like when I was at the OB and they took my blood pressure. Like, I guess that's really the only like sign. They like right away, the blood pressure thing did it. I don't even know if like they had read my urine test at that point. Like, I think she was kind of just like, okay, because like that's an extremely high blood pressure. Like, if you look at the chart, it's, extremely high. So they were just like, okay, you have to get this baby out kind of thing. So I think at that point they were like, this is preeclampsia, because they put me on the magnesium for that specific purpose when we got to the hospital. And I was just like definitely lethargic. And the swollenness more so was like, is evident in the face. So like people get swollen ankles, that's pretty normal. I had swollen ankles as well at that point, but just like my whole legs were swollen. Like I would wear shorts or like tight, leggings, and it would leave marks in my like my thighs. Like, so my whole legs were swollen. My face was swollen. Like, so I think the face is a bigger tell of preeclampsia versus just like your ankles being swollen. So yeah, the swelling, and like I said, with the swelling comes the rapid weight gain. So if you're gaining like a lot, like I think I was gaining like 2 pounds a week. And I was like, that's kind of weird, right? So like 1 pound a week is pretty normal. 2 pounds a week, especially at the end when normally the growth kind of slows a little bit, like that was a lot. So the rapid weight gain along with the swelling, especially in the face, the high blood pressure, and the protein in the urine, which again wasn't checked until my 36-week appointment. So when I finally went into my 36-week appointment, because they're like, all right, come into the office now, you're getting close. My blood pressure was a little high. The protein in my urine was a little high. So they were like, okay, we're going to send you down for blood work just to check out, make sure everything's okay. I was like, great. Went to a lower floor of the building, got the blood work done, and then left. And I didn't hear from them the whole week. I was coming back for my 37-week appointment, which I thought was a little weird. I didn't even get like oh, everything's okay or not okay. I went back to my 37-week appointment in person again, and they checked my blood pressure. And it was 160 over 90, which is extremely high. So she was basically like, you need to go right to the hospital. I was like, okay. And at this point, I knew something was wrong. I made my husband and myself bring our hospital bags to that appointment. I just knew. I was like, something is not right. I don't feel like well at all. And it was just like, it wasn't like, oh, I'm a little achy. I was just like, things are not right. So for that 37-week appointment, we both brought our hospital bags, thank God, because I was traveling from, we had since moved to the suburbs, but I still had my appointments in Philadelphia. So we went into the city for our appointment. They sent us to the hospital, which was like 5 blocks away. So thank God we already had our bags and everything, and we were ready to go. So I did have some sense that things were not right. And of course, so this was like 3 weeks early, because his due date was originally June 28th, and they moved it up to like the 19th, then the 16th of June. I don't know, all over the place. I remember feeling very emotional, especially because my husband couldn't come in with me at that point. So he was in the car downstairs outside of the building in the city waiting for me. So I was in there by myself. And like going into it, like I kind of knew, again, like I brought my hospital bag and everything. So like I kind of knew, but just like being there and receiving that news by yourself, it's scary because it's like, this was not planned. Now we're going to have to go do some type of induction. So I think I definitely got a little emotional. Like I called down to my husband and was like, hey, like we need to go to the hospital, and just going downstairs by myself, like, going to find him. Like I was definitely scared and very emotional. And I mean, it's still like, I obviously knew something was coming, but just when it like hits you and you're like, oh, like this is not okay. So yeah, very emotional, just from the trek from the OB office down to my husband in the car, driving 5 blocks down the road. Like, it's just this weird sense of like, okay, like things are going to happen and I don't know what it's going to look like. And that's something that I definitely felt throughout that whole process, was just things being told to me, and just I I had no idea. I was just felt a little like not part of the process or anything. So I had very strong feelings about that. So then when I went through my second pregnancy and labor and delivery, we had a doula, because I was like, I just don't want to feel like not present, not in control, and anything like that. So that part definitely hit me hard, because yeah, things were just happening and being told to me. And I was even stressing about my husband not being able to be there. I was like, what are we going to do if in our state at this time they say you can't have anyone with you? Because it was happening in other places. And I was like, that also put me through like an emotional, you know. So we were like, we will just go to a different state, like whatever. Like, so we were freaking out about that. But luckily, one person was allowed to be with me. So he did come in. Thank God. Especially with everything that happened. I don't know how I would have done it by myself. Yeah. So anyways, got COVID tested. And then because I had preeclampsia and it can lead to seizures during labor, you have to be on magnesium to help prevent that. So I got like an IV put in my arm. So I'm on a magnesium drip the whole time, which means I have to be bedridden and I'm on a clear liquids diet. So I can't get out of bed, clear liquids diet, and I have a catheter put in. So I am just immobile on this bed, just waiting for this whole process to happen. And of course, I'm like 3 weeks early, so my body's not ready to go into labor. So they have to start inductions, and they go through pretty much all the inductions. So first, they give me I forget what it's called, prostaglandin, to help ripen the cervix. And then a few hours later, they insert a Foley balloon, which slowly fills up with saline to dilate the cervix. Then that eventually comes out at about 3 or 4 centimeters. And then they start me on Pitocin. So it's kind of just like a whole process. So this started about 1 p.m. on Thursday of 2020, May 28th. And then by about 7 p.m., I think, is when they started the Pitocin. So it's kind of just like a whole process, me just like laying there, again, things just happening to me. And so finally Pitocin started, contractions started a little bit later. Eventually I got an epidural at like 2 or 3 a.m. Because, I can't move. I can't do anything about the pain. I'm bedridden. So I'm like, well, I kind of don't know how long this whole process is going to be. Let me at least try and rest and get some, relief from this so I can last the whole time. So I get that, and I am able to nap, which is nice. And then eventually, so the next day, when they come in and check me around 1 p.m. the next day, so it had been like a full 24 hours, I'm 10 centimeters and ready to start pushing. I'm like, all right. So again, I can't really do much because I'm bedridden with a catheter and an epidural. So I'm just on my back pushing. And I pushed for about 3 hours. And that was that was like the hardest thing. It feels like you're running a marathon, but like 4 marathons in a row, right? Like it's nonstop. It was 3 hours. And I kind of wish they would have like, maybe taken a break. And so this kind of happened with my second, and it went a lot better. Like taking a pause, do like a side lying position or something to rotate the pelvis. But no, it was just 3 straight hours pushing on my back. At one point, they talked about doing an episiotomy, and I was like, please no. I was like, please do not. So that was at least one thing that I felt like I said no to, because I did not want to be cut if I did not need to be. So I said no, and luckily they did not. And then eventually, like 3 hours later at 4 p.m., he was delivered, followed by my placenta, which I don't remember that part. And then the next thing, I hemorrhaged. I was just bleeding out. The doctor was very calm, thank God. But she was kind of freaking out, called like 12 nurses and people ran into the room. The doctor had to basically like shove her arm up there to help stop the bleeding, was pressing on my belly to contract my uterus. Like it was bad. So that was happening at the same time my son like needed to be taken to the NICU. So like literally they just held him up next to my face for the saddest picture ever of us. And then they rushed him off to the NICU. Like he had some fluid in his lungs and like his limbs were like not super responding. So yeah, so I was hemorrhaging, baby gets rushed off to the NICU. I don't know how long it all took, but eventually they got under control. I got 2 units of blood. So I had a blood transfusion happening. Yeah. And then I think around 7 p.m., the nurse shift changes and the night nurse comes in and she's like, oh, like you have to start pumping. And I'm like, what? Like, I just feel like I'm like, did I have a baby? Like what kind of just happened? Like just so much commotion happened. Saw the baby for like a second, baby was gone. And yeah, so that whole delivery experience was just very wild. I didn't even realize it happened. So because I was so spent after all 3 hours of pushing. So like he was delivered, placenta was delivered, I didn't even know. And then everyone else just started freaking out in the room. Like I didn't even feel anything, but like I saw the doctor freak out. She called like code whatever, like 12 other nurses, whatever, ran into the room. Like people were just running around like crazy trying to figure out what to do. So I just like couldn't even tell. I was just laying there like, I don't know what's happening. I'm just gonna lay here. And that was actually more painful than her trying to control the hemorrhaging with one arm up my vaginal canal, another one pressing on my uterus. Like even though I had like the epidural, like that was so painful. I was like, oh my God. So that, I don't even know how long that happened. I just was like laying there, trying to just be okay with it all. I was like, well, this is it. Like, I didn't even like, I didn't know how to react. I was like, I guess I'm just going to wait until they figure this out. So I don't remember how long it took, but eventually it calmed down before, like, I guess right before the next nurse shift. Cause I feel like it was commotion like until around that 7 p.m. when that shift came. So then, yeah, I mean, I was planning on breastfeeding, but she was like, oh, you have to start pumping, which like wasn't even a thought in my head. So I was not thinking that at all. So luckily she, brought in the hospital pump, showed me how to do it. Cause again, never did this before, didn't know how to pump or use any of the parts. And it looks very complex when you first look at a pump. So I did that, and I had to do that every 3 hours. But one thing I didn't do, and I always encourage people to do this, is I didn't have like a pumping bra with me in the hospital because I just didn't even think. I was like, obviously I'll just, skin to skin, breastfeed the baby. That's how it works. So I was literally sitting there holding the pump up to my boobs every single time, every 3 hours when I pumped. And I was there so I had him on Friday and I was there till Monday. So it was a long time. So I always I tell people, I'm like, I really hope you don't need it, but pack a bra that you could pump in, like if you're planning on doing that, right? So that was like kind of a surprise. I was like, oh, so I started doing that every 3 hours. So on the magnesium, even though it I forget if it came out Friday night or Saturday night. I couldn't get out of bed for 24 hours after the delivery or getting the magnesium out just because my body wouldn't have been able to like get up and move around and walk. So for a whole nother day, I was still bedridden with the catheter, pumping, doing all that. So I couldn't even go to the NICU until the next night, Saturday night, to even see him. So my husband went Friday night down to see him, and he was just attached to so many wires and tubes and in a little box. So one of like the saddest things was when he came back to the room after visiting him, he just started crying, and I was freaking out because I was like, say something first. Don't just walk in here and cry, because you like, obviously, what am I thinking? Like the absolute worst. So he just walks in like crying because obviously it's a very sad sight. And he didn't even get to hold him because he was just in this box hooked up to so many things. So, it was just very emotional for him. And that's obviously why he started crying. But I was just like, what is wrong? Like, why are you crying? So he saw him that Friday night and then not again for a whole week because the visitor policy in our hospital for COVID was one person once a day. Unless you were like the person in the hospital. So I could go more than once a day, but if I went that day, he could not go that day. So, and we could not go together. So that was also wild and a very emotional experience. Again, like for him or me to be down there in the NICU, first time ever having a baby, not knowing anything, and just being there alone, like having like to sit here and stare at your little baby in a box with all of these two. Like the first time I saw him on Saturday night, I couldn't hold him. Like I couldn't take him out because there was just too much going on. So it was like I was just and I was wheeled down in a wheelchair too. I remember this because I was off the magnesium. It had just been like 24 hours, but like still you're a little like shaky and wobbly, plus, hemorrhaging and everything. So I was wheeled down in a wheelchair to go see my baby in the NICU who I couldn't hold. So that was a very emotional experience. And like he was being like tube fed because he wasn't mature enough or able to like eat yet. So finally Sunday night, I was able to give him like a tiny bottle. So I was able to bottle feed him for the first time Sunday night. And also the pumping thing was a whole, like, I was obviously early, so my milk hadn't come in. So I feel like I pumped for like 3 days before I like literally got anything. And that was like such a defeating thing. Like it was, so again, to add to all of the emotional stuff, like pumping felt like nothing was happening. Eventually it did, but it was like 3 days of that. And then he was being tube fed or bottle fed. I didn't even try breastfeeding him until like I don't know, a couple days later because he was just so little and hooked up to so many things. And when I did, of course, you have to wear a mask in the NICU. So when I did, I'm wearing a mask, trying to look down and breastfeed for the first time. It's not like it was just a hot mess. Like it's not working. I can't really see him that well. He's still like a little early, so it's not catching on, not figuring it out. So that was just a very also emotional thing. It's just going to the NICU every day and being there by myself, like not knowing anything, who to talk to, what to do. I just felt like the communication between what was happening in there and like when I was back in my room, I just had no idea. I'm like, what's going on? I don't know who to get answers from or anything like that. So we tried to extend our stay at the hospital as long as possible because we didn't know when he was coming home or anything. So we could only stay until Monday. And then eventually we had to leave, but he stayed through until Friday. So he was in there a whole week. We stayed till Monday. And then my husband drove me back to the hospital every day. Basically, like, it was like I was going back to work. I had to wake up, get changed, pack food for the day, pack my pump and everything, bring the milk that I had pumped, go to the hospital, spend, I don't know, 6 to 8 hours there. Like, it was wild. Like, feeling I had to just get up and go back to work or something, like right after. So he was 37 weeks. He was born like 6 pounds, 9 ounces. So not too tiny, but he had fluid in his lungs, probably from being in the birth canal for a while, for like having pushed for 3 hours. His muscle tone was like not great. And that, I don't know if that was because I was on magnesium. I don't know. So muscle tone wasn't great. His bilirubin number was not good. So he was like jaundice. He was like under the lights. So, and he had to get like he had to be able to eat so much. So like feeding had to be happening. So yeah, there was like a couple different things. And eventually it was kind of like the bilirubin number that was holding him up at the end of the week, which is just so frustrating. I'm like, why is this stupid number just like holding you up? Because by then he was like eating as much as he should have been and everything, still through bottle feeding. But he was eating, which was good. So they had started with some donation milk, like when I was like taking forever to get milk. So I think I'm pretty sure they'd asked us. I don't remember specifically, but I think I said like donor milk is fine. So they were doing a combination of that and whatever I was sending them. Eventually, after like 3 or 4 days, I was actually getting enough milk. And because, they don't take a ton in the beginning, but I was able to produce enough milk. So eventually it was just my milk, but still bottle fed. And then of course, like post NICU, when he gets out of the hospital, I end up giving myself an oversupply because I'm still pumping and feeding him. Because once again, new mom, I just didn't know any better. I'm like, oh, I have to pump all the time, but also let me try and breastfeed my baby. So like I ended up getting an oversupply, which was not fun. It all worked out, but yeah, I didn't know. I didn't know any better. So finally, Friday, a week after he was born, I'm there and I'm talking with whoever's doing rounds. And they were like, it's looking good for today. Like, we just have to check a couple more things and whatever. So when we finally got the go, like Friday afternoon to leave, like I was just like, thank God, called my husband. I was like, we can, but again, I'm just I think I went down to get the car seat. So I think the car seat was still in the car. Went down to get the car seat and bring it back in. Again, he still can't come in. He's just waiting outside for us. So like I get the car seat to do the whole thing. Like I'm so excited. I'm just like, get us out of here, please. Like this has just been too much. Very, very happy when we got home Friday evening and everything, but it was a journey to get there. So yeah, for what had happened, I feel like the recovery was not bad, all things considered. And like my mind was just so consumed on something else, especially like in that immediate time, that I just right away just started thinking about, okay, have to get back to the hospital, have to do this for the baby, this. So I don't think I ever really focused on myself that much, which again, did things differently round 2. It's a lot. So I still feel like very heavy about it, but I mean, having gone through the second and everything was good and everything, it's like, all right, like, it's good to know that like you can have a good experience too. Because it was definitely a little scary just thinking about like, all right, what is going to happen for number 2? Because all I know is that first experience kind of thing. And so like the whole delivery for the second one went honestly like how I would have wanted to go. It was great, like working with the doula and everything, and the labor was like from start to finish like half the amount of time and everything was great. So like I said, we worked with a doula because I was just like, I don't want things to be told at me. I want to feel more present and involved in the whole process. And the doula was great. She was very like, whatever you want is what I want, and we'll work to that. So we like created a birth plan, but a flexible one. That's also one of my wisdom or words of advice I always tell people is just go in being aware and informed of all of the options, all of the possibilities. Not all of them are happy, but it's good to just know about them. And be flexible, because it's great to have an idea and, I want things to go like XYZ, but just be aware of, other factors might happen. You're not the only one involved here. There's also a little baby and they make a lot of choices themselves. So it's just educate yourself, be very informed, be aware, be as present as you can be in the whole process. So I just like people to know that, and have a good support team if you can, whether that's your partner, doula, midwife, whoever it is. Just like having someone else there for you in your corner is a huge support.